Documentaries.com proudly presents The Boy Who Stood on Bricks. Written by Kohler, copyright 2015. All rights reserved. The story is fiction. Similarities to the person living or deceased are a coincidence.
The backstory. Anyone who had been paying attention could see the conservation company wanted the village demolished. They had started a year earlier by convincing the farmers to sell their land around the village, and the job was made easy because most of the land around the village was flat and swampy. Poor crop yields were common, and more money was spent on trying to drain fields from seawater than actually growing crops. A field officer with the state fish and game said it had to do with the old course of the river wanting to come back. He gave a lecture at the high school, and his verification, supported by years of documentation, helped to lead to the creation of the Conservation Company, an outside organization that was comprised of concerned environmental investors whose main purpose was to reclaim the land in and around the village for wildlife rehabilitation. Few cared that the Conservation Company placed on its agenda the total acquisition of the village lands. That detail was buried in a fine gray print, and by the time anyone had decided to read it, the public outcry was minimal. Everyone living in the village was dirt poor. Nobody needed a lesson on the way it was. It was just the way it was. The paper was quick to remind people of the fact, but never gave a reason why. Headlines were always coming out, touting the evils of poverty, and one in particular had done really well for the local police. A major drug bust had gone down. 2 men in the village were arrested for manufacturing methamphetamine. The paper printed a picture of them, smiling, and half their teeth were nothing but bony nubs. This convinced the folks at the courthouse to make some phone calls, and as a result, the sheriff got a new truck and a large sum of grant money to help in the war against drugs. And in small print, poverty. With the press on board and the support of the community, residents of the village never had a chance. Following the lecture at the high school, the local university was asked to take samples of the soil in and around the village. The findings suggested that the tiny community was on top of a precious reserve of oil, and overnight the Conservation Company changed its name and its purpose. It went from being stewards of the land to that of an oil company with a dual mission: harvest the natural resources below the earth and leave the visible land better than they had found it. Nobody asked any questions on how it was possible to change such a well-thought-out position so quickly. Neither did anybody try to understand the socio-economic problems facing the village. All anyone did was what the others, with well-defined intentions, did. They looked away. And this story is about the consequences of that decision. Chapter 1 of The Boy Who Stood on Bricks, written by Kohler. The village had a pack of hoodlum boys ranging in ages 8 to 13. And like a roaming band of butt-sniffing pooches, they wandered here and there in constant search of something to do or get into. This meant that privacy was a commodity in the village. Snooping was a way of life. Some of the boys stole things, others took great pride in destruction. Windows were always a target, as too was anything deemed new or invaluable. When the village put up new street signs, they were vandalized. When the county sheriff came to perform checkups, his tires went flat. When the dope choppers took to flight in the steamy night, the boys shot illegal firecrackers into the sky. And when the sheriff returned to seize the firecrackers, the boys vanished. "You can't protect them forever," the sheriff, Rex Canton, would say, pointing his fingers at the parents. "I'm on to all of you. Somebody bought those firecrackers, which is a felony, and I'm going to find out who. But he never did. Nobody would say anything. The sheriff would come out, make his rounds, and then go home disgusted. The people would gather to laugh. The boys would come out of hiding. It was a way of life in the village. Most of the people had been mischievous youth who had turned out okay. Not everyone dealt drugs, and being poor was no crime. The boys were simply carrying on a tradition, getting it out of their system, as the elders would comment. Whatever was done one day would the next be history. The villagers were content with that philosophy, but that was about to change. Chapter 2 of The Boy Who Stood on Bricks, written by Kohler. Close to the edge of the village, in a thick patch of woods, was an old brick silo. The silo was large and missing its roof. It had been built decades earlier by a farmer long forgotten, and being a curious place to visit, it lent itself to constant speculation and inspection. One boy in particular, a deaf mute named Jameson, found this silo to be quite alluring. Jameson lived with his grandmother. His father was in prison. His mother was missing. The boy would spend his free time in the silo, walking around, feeling the sandy walls with his fingers, smelling the bricks, and more than not, looking up at the exposed sky. To him, the sky seemed odd. He sometimes lay on his back and imagined the circle to be a giant television screen. Luckily, the hoodlum boys left the silo alone. Nobody messed with it. Nobody messed with Jameson. The silo was off limits to thievery and destruction. Jameson was off limits to being picked on. It was a very interesting ethic the sheriff had ignored. Chapter 3 of The Boy Who Stood on Bricks, written by Kohler. It was late in the day when the clouds began to change. All morning they had been rolling fast. As the day progressed, they became darker. With the darkness came the whistling. With the whistling came the tornado watch. Jameson hated storms. When he was 4 years old, his father, in a drunken rage, locked him out in one. Unable to talk, the child pounded and pounded on the door. He pounded so long and hard that his little fist began to bleed. By the time the neighbors found him, he was bleeding badly, and he was rushed to the hospital. Jameson returned home a few days later. His father was gone, and his grandmother took him in. His being locked out and abandoned did something to Jameson. He began to interpret storms as more than just scary events. Storms became omens. Each one was something to fear. Over time, this fear became stifling. Simply mentioning the possibility of a storm could send him into a reclusive spin. That is what happened the night the tornado hit the village. While everybody was riding out the storm on a drug and whatever, Jameson was cowered down in the corner of his bedroom. His grandmother was sitting on the edge of the bed reading the Bible. Jameson was tied against the wall with his legs tucked. Dread on his mind. Outside, the tree branches swayed. The village was being torn apart. Chapter 4 of The Boy Who Stood on Bricks, written by Kohler. During the storm, the silo came crashing down. A mountain of bricks was all that remained. Jameson took this as a sign from God to build a shelter. Brick by brick, he started to build the walls, and over time a rectangle came to shape. When the hoodlum boys learned about what he was doing, they came to see for themselves. Immediately they recognized the problem. Jameson had built the walls, but the shelter had no roof. This prompted them to pitch in and build one. Jameson took a seat in the high weeds that surrounded the shelter and watched as his friends climbed the bricks. They worked for days, and the young boy waited to the side. The building of the roof became a project for the hoodlums, and for a week the village was quiet. It was work by day and sleep by night. Then came the day the roof was finished. The boys celebrated, and things went back to normal. The sheriff came out. His tires went flat. The dope choppers buzzed about. Illegal firecrackers went off. Over and over, week after week, things went missing. Things got destroyed. It was a cycle of daily life in the village. Jameson sat in his shelter. The boys did whatever. Chapter 5 of The Boy Who Stood on Bricks, written by Kohler. "You know, I don't have to say it twice," commented Sheriff Canton, lighting a cigarette. "I'm not going to stand out here all day soaking up this sun." Rex Canton was a tall figure of authority, complete with a beer gut, brown hair, and snake-like eyes that went well with his oddly shaped torso, which was thin, thick, and supported by chicken legs that would have looked even more odd had not his arms been just as useless. He remembered being young, but never understood being lazy. The Hoodlum boys were a menace to his type of well-structured society. They were everything that was wrong with the world, and he understood only one thing: they needed to be corrected. "It must be what, Eston?" asked Rex, pausing for an answer from a deputy that was slow to come. 90? It figures it would be. It's always hot when I get called out to this kind of thing. Nothing ever happens on cool days." He placed a cigarette to his lips and reached into his pocket and pulled out a moist handkerchief he had already used several times earlier, but it still worked to dab his brow. "It's the psychology of it all," he continued, with the cigarette pinched between his salty lips, bouncing about like a conductor's one. His clammy hand wiped and swabbed his brow, while the paper on the filter became a bitter sponge. "Yes, sir, Eston," he said, more clearly as he removed the smoke stick from his lips and tucked away the dampness. "It's the psychology of it. And you know I got things to do far better than melting." He waved his hand about with the cigarette crimped between the fork of his fingers. "Why, I could be out at Willow Pond right now, working on my crappie technique," he reminded, as though he was telling things known that were known and should have been expected. "I got this new bait out of Texas. Remember that bait I was telling you about? That's the stuff they say the little suckers can't get enough of. Well, I got it last night. Delivery man showed up and laid it right on my porch. Yes, he did. He did indeed. Yes, sir, Eston. I could be finishing right now. Instead, I'm here, in the woods, staring at this thing here, this pile of rocks," he said, pointing, "and sweating myself to death. Just look at this sweat." He leaned back on his hip and hummed a bit, his eyes thinning to a squint as he went deep into a thought. "Either them boys come out of that thing soon, Eston, or we're going to have to get creative." Chapter 6 of The Boy Who Stood on Bricks, written by Kohler. The problem was the shelter. As a structure, it was in the way of progress. The tract of land occupied by the woods, where the silo had stood, was on schedule to be cleared by the Rylos Oil Company. But Jameson and the hoodlums were held up inside. They had been there for several days, and all attempts by the authorities to get them to come out had been met with bottle rocket resistance and the occasional air rifle ping. One of the boys, a sandy-haired kid named Mickey, had established himself as the alpha male. He did this on the very first day when a guy in a bulldozer asked him to vacate the shelter so he could demolish it. Mickey, fed up and disgusted, emerged into the daylight to face down the man. "We're not leaving," he shouted. "You got to, son," replied the worker. "I got orders." He held up a yellow envelope as proof. Mickey scrunched his nose and shook his head. "So," he replied, "what good does that do me?" The man shook his head in utter amazement at the question. He looked over his shoulder at the crew, waiting to start clearing the side. "Come on, son," begged the man. "Don't make this bad. You look like a good kid. Just get out of there so we can work, or I'll have to call the law, and you wouldn't want that, would you?" Mickey, upon hearing this, had a solution. He stepped back inside the shelter, and when he came back out, he was pumping an air rifle. The man saw the gun and held up his hands. "Now hold on, son," he said nervously. "We can work this out." Mickey ignored this plea. He kept pumping. The man started backing up. But he did so, walking backwards, and this caused him to stumble. From inside the shelter, the boy began to laugh and cheer. Mickey stopped and stood his ground. "I'm not playing with you," Mickey shouted. "Not you, or you, or you," he said, pointing the rifle at members of the work crew. "You can call that stupid fathead sheriff out here if you want, and we'll tell him the same thing. We're not leaving." The boys clapped and cheered. Whistles came from the shelter while streaming bottle rockets took to the sky and popped. The man, disgusted and stumped, walked away in a cloud of gray smoke. Mickey stood in the cloud, smiling proudly and taking twisting, mocking bows as though he was on stage before an applauding crowd that was shouting, "Bravo, Mickey! Bravo!" Chapter 7 of The Boy Who Stood on Bricks. Written by Kohler. A few company men, executives, attempting to look casual and down to earth, had gathered around the bulldozer. They were all wearing blue jeans, golf shirts, sunglasses, and sporting clean, polished hard hats with bright company logos. They were talking with hands on hips and looking over documents with the workers. One man kept nodding toward the shelter, causing the worker who had the altercation with Mickey to take notice each time he did. Sheriff Canton, who was off to the side puffing on a cigarette, was confiding in Eston. They were both eyeing the situation with skepticism. "Those boys are causing a big stir," said Rex. "I hope the news don't get wind of this." Suddenly, and as if on cue, a news van pulled up. The company men all looked. The workers all looked. Rex and Eston looked. It was the very attractive blonde Diane Sims from the local news channel. "Great," moaned Rex, stomping out his cigarette. "Just what I need." As Diane stepped down out of the van, the head company man, an older, bitter, slashing throat type, started marching toward Rex. "We can't have this," he said frantically. "We just can't have it." "Well, I know that, but I don't think we have an option." "You can tell them to leave. Make up something. You're the sheriff." "Make up something?" questioned Rex. "What do you want me to make up? How about I tell them there's a comet heading this way? That should distract them." "Stop being condescending. Just do your job and tell them to leave." "Well, I'm not sure if you've studied law or not, but I have a bit. The press has special rights under the Constitution. It's an unfortunate thing, I know, but I can't just tell her to leave." "Maybe not, but you can ask." Rex grimaced. He snorted and spat. He turned away and put his hand on Eston's shoulder. He began to lead the young deputy away for a secret conversation. "That reporter," he said, almost whispering, "wouldn't be out here unless somebody called. Somebody needs to find out who." Eston grinned, started toward his patrol car. As he was, Diane passed him and approached Sheriff Canton. "How are you, Sheriff?" "I could be better, Miss Sims." "You got any news, Sheriff?" "As much as you." "And what would that be?" asked Diane. "That depends," answered Rex. "What do you know?" "I know there are some boys supposedly held up in a brick building," replied Diane, glancing at the shelter. "Well, we're on the same page then," replied Rex. He gave her a big smile, but Diane was not satisfied. "Are we?" she asked, turning around and faking a sigh. She looked puzzled at seeing the crew gathered around the bulldozer. The men were all spying, but when they were discovered doing it, they dropped their heads and pretended to be innocent. She chuckled at their shyness. "It seems the company is hiring blind workers these days," she noted. "You find that funny, Miss Sims? Making fun of people with disabilities?" No, replied Diane, but I do find it strange that nobody can see that brick building over there. She pointed. He looked in the direction she was pointing. Oh, yes, he said, in astonishment. That. Well, that's a unique thing, isn't it? Oh, it is, she replied, while giving a suspicious nod. I hear it used to be a silo, Sheriff. Well, come to think of it, Miss Sims, it does seem that I recall it might have been, but you never can tell. I guess not, said Diane, ending the conversation and walking toward the shelter. Where are you going, Miss Sims? To inspect this enigma of a brick building, Sheriff. Well, you can't, he said sharply and abruptly. She sighed, and shaking her head in dismay, Diane turned slowly around to face him. And why not, she asked. Because it's under investigation. Investigation? Yes. For what? I can't say. You can't say, asked Diane. No. Well, that doesn't sound very nice, she replied, giving a sad face. Well, I'm sorry, but you must not go any further. It's official police business. Meanwhile, in the shelter, Mickey was busy listening to their conversation through a crack in the bricks. The other hoodlums were busy making bottle rocket launchers out of old steel pipes, and Jameson was preoccupied with making sandwiches. What do you see, Mickey? Asked one of the hoodlums. The sheriff's talking to a lady on the news. Really? The boys got up and peeked out. I've seen her before, said one of the boys. She's got a good set on her. They all snickered and went back to their jobs, but Mickey kept his post. As they sat down, Jameson got up and walked to get a look at the pretty reporter. He stared out innocently and sadly said nothing. But Mickey studied his face. He could tell Jameson wanted to talk and would if he could. Don't worry about all this, Jameson, said Mickey in a soft, comforting tone. They'll not get in here. That's right, said one of the boys. Nobody's getting in here. That's right, said another, and soon the entire group was chiming in. During this chorus of reasons, Jameson moved from the bricks and returned to making sandwiches while Mickey continued to keep watch. Outside, Diane was unaware that she was the main subject of very interesting thoughts. Well, Sheriff, she said, if I can't inspect the brick building, I guess I'm just going to have to interview some of the people in the village to get their side of the story. Diane began to walk back to her news van. She signaled to her cameraman Joe to start the engine. Rex watched for a few moments before turning to look this way and that. He looked down and then up, and with a sigh he called out to her, Miss Sims. Diane stopped and spun around. I don't know what your angle is, he said. What's that, Sheriff? She asked boldly. I can't hear you. He walked up to her. I said, I don't know what angle you're wanting to go on this, but if you could, try and keep it mild. He looked over in the direction of the company men. He was embarrassed to have done so. Diane caught his odd expression and gave a figurative grin. She balled her tongue and her jaw and chuckled. You're cute, Sheriff. Rex became nervous and nodded. Real cute, said Diane, continuing to make him uneasy. She paused and looked intensely into his small-town eyes. You're so cute, it almost makes me sick. What are you getting at, Miss Sims? I grew up in a place with a sheriff like you, she said, getting close and tapping her fingernail on his badge. Just like you. Well then, he said, smugly, you can understand the need for discretion. Oh yes, Sheriff, she replied coyly, backing up. I can completely understand your need for it. She turned around and sauntered off, her body movements the sexiest Rex had seen in years. She waved at the company men and the work crew. Without taking his eyes off her, Rex began to reach for another cigarette. But before he had a chance to pull one out, the head company man was stomping towards him. Chapter 8 of The Boy Who Stood on Bricks, written by Kohler. In the village, most of the families had packed up and moved away. Surveyors had been coming around for months, mapping out areas of interest for oil exploration, and company representatives had been going door to door, giving residents options on buyouts. Those who remained were strong-willed, and some outside the village had the opinion they were too stupid to see a good thing when they did. But the truth was that many, despite being impoverished, were happy where they lived. "It's my home," one woman told a company man who insisted she could do better than live in a old home. "It may not be much to you," said the woman. "To me, it's just fine." It was common practice for those living in the village to adopt the life of a clam, by staying close to the place where they had been born and never venturing far from it. A few families had even lived in the same home their grandparents had built a century earlier, constantly having to justify why was insulting to their heritage. To these poor people, living tethered to the familial past made sound sense. Life was a sun-up to sunset reality filled with hardships. Why make it more difficult than it needed to be? There was no need to clutter up a moment of the day with unnecessary bills like mortgages and rent. That money could be used to put food on the table, beer in the gut, and freedom between the fingers. Yet, what is good for the goose is seldom ever good for the gander. Everyone laughed at the stories of company men being run off with guns and surveyors having their lives threatened at the hands of toothless codgers spitting tobacco juice. Even Rex, who was charged with the unpleasant task of evacuating the village, found the stories amusing. But in the end, he had a job to do. He had to get the people moved out of the village so the company could start drilling. This need led to a vigilante effort by a few in the surrounding communities to start monitoring the village in the hopes of speeding up the removal process. The Burley brothers, robust twins in their mid-40s, who were anticipating a great battle for independence, took it upon themselves to camp out on a road leading to and from the village in an effort to help the police suppress the uprising. They purchased all sorts of spy equipment, special radios for private communication, tiny cameras that could be mounted to trees, binoculars designed for night viewing, micro recorders for intercepting suspicious conversations, and even a remote control helicopter outfitted with a camera that could be flown safely over the village. For several months, the brothers watched and reported their findings to Rex. They wrote down license plate numbers, hid out in trees, and used a stash of money procured by Rex for the sole purpose of buying drugs and illicit items from the people they were spying on. The investigation was going well, until one night when the tiny helicopter came buzzing loudly over the tree line and hovered over the village. Because the helicopter had been in storage, the Burley brothers had hardly learned how to fly it. The residents, on site to witness the maiden voyage of what was touted as an invaluable tool for police surveillance, were convinced a chainsaw had taken flight. This prompted someone to raise his pistol to the night sky and take a lucky pot shot at the spy device. The helicopter burst into flames and came crashing down. The next day, rumors began to circulate about secret police monitoring the village. Threats were made, and someone spray-painted, "Go home, scum," on a company bulldozer. The threats, combined with the vandalism, led Rex to call for help from outside agency, and real secret police joined the investigation. Soon, everyone was accusing everybody of something. Unmarked cars were showing up, and people were being arrested for no apparent reason other than living in the village. Meanwhile, the Burley brothers, who had inadvertently created the whole mess, enjoyed the chaos until it was learned by the authorities that the two were selling the drugs they had purchased with government money so they could add more gadgets to their cache of spy equipment. With their anonymity gone, both brothers were arrested, and their faces were proudly displayed in the news. They were charged with inciting violence and misappropriation of funds reserved for official business. Each was sentenced to 1 year in prison and paid a hefty fine. But regardless of the punishment, the damage had been done. What minute trace of trust existed between the police and residents of the village was gone. Neighbors began to turn on neighbors, and people became more tight-lipped than before. This made Eston's job difficult. As he drove slowly through a graveyard of empty, rusting trailers and decaying wooden homes, people peeked out at him through dingy window shades. He could see them, and when they knew they were spotted, they would duck back in. This would prompt him to stop, park, and knock on the door. But after doing this several times, he became disgusted and called back to the scene of the standoff using his police radio. "Hey, Sheriff?" "What is it, Deputy?" "I'm out here and nobody's willing to talk to me." "Have you seen anyone?" "A few." "Anybody important?" "Describe important." "I mean anyone who has been in trouble with the law. Think, son, think. I know you're only 26, but that's what you're paid for. Have you seen somebody we can lean on?" "To be honest, Sheriff, nobody will open their door. I drive by, and they all just stare out. And when I stop, they don't answer." "Have you tried getting out and walking around the house, tapping on doors and windows?" "I've tried all that, and nobody will acknowledge." "Nope." Rex sighed and pondered his next move. "All right, then. Come back, Eston. I'll think of something." Chapter 9 of The Boy Who Stood on Bricks, written by Kohler. The news of the standoff had traveled fast. It was a talk in nearby towns. Men gossiped in morning cafes. Women talked in the beauty salons. Occasionally somebody formed an opinion in a checkout lane and announced it to the world, but in truth, nobody knew what was going to happen. All the opinions were beginning to mix into one giant ball of pessimism, and they were beginning to filter into the police station, where they weighed heavy on hard shoulders. In sum, there was a tension in the air, and at the sight of the standoff, the company man became more nervous. Rex kicked the ground with his boot and stared deeply at the brick shelter, where his mind centered on the unsettling thought that maybe, just maybe, he would not be reelected. Inside the shelter, Mickey took hold of Rex's stare, and the youth's curiosity was piqued. "I'm going to talk to him," said Mickey. "Are you crazy?" said one of the boys, taking Mickey by the arm. "You can't go out there. They'll not let you come back." "Relax. I won't go far," replied Mickey. "Jameson will keep watch. If anything happens, you all come out, raising 9 kinds of whatever. That fat sheriff won't be able to do anything." Mickey chuckled, but none of the boys even broke a half-hearted grin. They were all too worried. "Look, you just do what I say," continued Mickey, "and everything will be all right." The boys began to huddle in close to one another. They were trembling slightly, and Mickey formed an odd but worried look. "What is your problem?" he asked. "We're scared," said one of the boys. "What if you don't come back? What then?" "Scared?" questioned Mickey. "Well, you picked a good time to say it." He dropped down and leaned into his quiver mass of eyes. "Now look," he said, his lips pinched on verbatim. "Somebody has got to go out and say something, and that somebody is me." Mickey looked at Jameson. The young boy was nervous, but stood proudly and walked to the lookout spot. The crack in the bricks. "See that?" continued Mickey. "Jameson can't even speak, and he's got more courage than any of you." "That's not true," shouted one. "He's half retarded. He only watches your lips and eyes. He's a stupid retard who does whatever he thinks will make you happy." Mickey's temper rose to a crescendo. He raised his hand and slapped the boy's face. The youth stumbled backward, dropped to the ground, and propped himself up in recovery. "Get out of that crappy, frightened mood you're in, and stand up for yourselves," ordered Mickey. The boys, heeding the advice as a warning, began to break apart and take corners of the shelter as their own. "And you," continued Mickey, pointing his finger at the elbow-bent hoodlum, "don't you ever talk about him like that again, or so help me, I'll give you a beating so bad you wish you were dead." Mickey turned to look at Jameson. The mute was staring out the crack, paying no attention to what was happening. "All right then," said Mickey, brushing off the tension. "I'm heading out. If anything happens, you raise 9 kinds." Mickey made his way to the exit but stopped. With his body half in and half out, he poked his head through the opening and prairie-dogged the surroundings. "You see anything, Mickey?" asked one of the boys. "Yeah, the sheriff." Mickey pushed on out into the open air. The boys all rushed over to Jameson and began to vie for a place to watch. Outside, Rex was startled to see a figure walking toward him. "Son," he said in a very fatherly tone, "you and your friends have caused a lot of trouble." "We didn't start it," replied Mickey. "You and them did." Rex turned to the work crew, all waiting for the green light. "I see," said Rex. "But what if I told you these men bought this ground fair and legal?" "I'd call you a liar," replied Mickey. "And so would a lot of other people." "Now look here," said Rex, raising his tone. "These men have legal claim to this property, and as long as I'm the sheriff, I'm going to make sure they get it." Mickey became so angry he started to spit and kick the ground. Sheriff Rex Canton had been in law enforcement most of his adult life. He had a wife, a daughter in college, a son who had drifted out west to join some band, and a whole list of reasons to dread waking up. But trying to reason with the unreasonable was what he hated most about the job in his life. Nobody wanted to listen, not even the most educated of persons, and everybody had justification for not doing so. "You're just a boy," continued Rex, easing into a plea, "and boys need to be doing something constructive with their time, like hunting or fishing. Do you like to fish?" "What are you doing, Sheriff?" a voice had interrupted. The sheriff spun around to see the lead company man stomping towards them. "See what you've done," said the sheriff to Mickey. "Now I have to deal with this." "Sheriff, this is ridiculous. He is a child. You are a man. Do something." "And what would you suggest?" asked Rex. "I would suggest you do your job and arrest him. He's a kid. I'm not doing that." "Precisely. You're not. And as a man who professes to uphold the law, you are doing a poor job of it. This boy and his friends are costing us money." "Do you hear that, son?" questioned Rex. "You are costing the company money." "So?" replied Mickey. "So?" questioned the company man. "You shot one of my men with a bottle rocket." "And I'll do it again," declared Mickey. "But the next time, I'll use something different." "You hear that, Sheriff? That is a blatant threat. Now do something." "I know you got a problem here," said Rex. "But I'm not going to arrest these boys." "And why not?" "Because they're boys," reminded Rex. "And I'm not sure it's legal." "Well, if you don't do something, Sheriff, I'll contact someone who will." The man turned around and started back to the bulldozing crew. The sheriff slumped a bit and scratched his head. He turned to look at Mickey, who was returning to the shelter. "Hey!" called Rex. Mickey stopped. Rex hurried to him. "I know you think this is all wrong, but these guys mean business," he warned. "So do we," said Mickey, defying interest. Rex grabbed Mickey's shoulder. Mickey jerked his arm away. Rex eased up. "Sorry about that, son, but you have to listen. I know you don't like me. Half the county thinks I'm a crook." Mickey looked down in agreement. "But all that aside," continued Rex, "these guys aren't going to play around. They don't care if you're 3 years old or 83. All that matters to them is what's beneath this land. Do you understand?" Mickey nodded. "Good," said Rex. "Then you'll stop all this." "We're not leaving," said Mickey. The boys started to walk back to the shelter. Rex turned and faced the work crew, and the company man scowled. He shook his head and pulled out a cigarette. Chapter 10 of The Boy Who Stood on Bricks. Written by Kohler. As the van turned onto the road leading to the village, Diane was beginning to doubt her chances of getting an interview. Too much had already happened to think any other way. The agents with Rylos had done a good job of shutting people up. As the road took them deeper into the thick woods surrounding the village, the consequences of poor civic leadership became apparent. Homes were no more than shanty shacks, and the trailers were far from modern. Dating back to the 70s, most of the trailers still had red brake lights attached for when they were hauled down the highway and delivered. A few had exposed wheels beneath them. Diane reached for a notebook. "Another idea for that novel?" questioned Joe. Frustrated, she looked over at him, but before she could reply, he was already on to something else. "If you ask me, Diane, we should go back. This is a lost cause out here." Did he care that what he had said a moment earlier had hurt her feelings? Or was it all in the day's work at a male-dominated news station, where one moved up because he was willing to play the game? You need to realize where you're at, she was told by an anchorman. You're not in the big city. Nobody climbs out of steerage and asks to steer the ship. These people don't want any controversy, or the least, to think about one. Just stick with the facts. Support the union, support the ball team, support the military, and stop wanting to change everything. Ignorance is bliss, Diane. You need to remember that if you hope to get your pension. Do what I do. Treat them like they're 1 minute away from drooling. It was everything she loathed about the rural farm beat. If she was pushy, it was for a reason. Just to get the van for the story had been a hassle. The van had been reserved earlier for a story about cows. A group of farmers had developed a new way to feed their cattle. The reporter who was assigned to do the job had called in sick, and the job was handed to her. This caused a problem. The cow story was relevant, but she had planned to report on the boys in the shelter, and the cow story, though newsworthy, could have been taken over the phone or done on a later date. The shelter was breaking news. In a spin, she frantically explained to the station manager that it was too late to backtrack. The station manager disagreed and wanted the story on the boys scrapped. The story about the cows is better, she was told. Do this story, and you can do the shelter thing later. Later, huffed Diane. But later was not a word in her vocabulary. Reporting was not about waiting, but about getting. She made a call to a higher-up, pled her case, and her story was agreed to. Ugh, she cursed under her breath. I'm so sick of dealing with idiots. What? Asked Joe. Nothing, replied Diane. Joe grinned, but in the process of returning to her observation, and without warning, the van swerved to avoid hitting Eston's patrol car that rocketed out of the side road directly in front of them. Watch the road, shouted Diane, bracing herself. The van came to a screeching halt. Eston got out of his car and came running up to them. That was close, said Eston. I almost hit you. Joe rolled the window down. You're very observant, he joked. I'm on patrol, said Eston, stiffening up. That's my job, to watch for crime. Way out here? Asked Joe in a sarcastic tone, and looking around at nothing but thick foliage. It must be a real hotbed of activity. It can be, replied Eston. Eston spat, placed his hands on his hips while he eased into a thought. You know, Diane, whispered Joe, turning to her, maybe he's got something wrong with him. I saw this show once about this small town that hired a mentally challenged cop in order to meet some quota. Oh, look, he's leaving, pointed Diane. Joe's thoughts were interrupted. Eston slammed the door on his patrol car and sped off. Diane watched the car race by the van. Dusk followed, and her eyes eased on to Joe, who very coldly said, If we start hearing banjo music, you're on your own. Diane began to experience a feeling of dread. She scanned the woods around them, and then focused her attention on the road before them. It tunneled off into heavy tree growth. I guess all we can do, she replied. Let's go forward. Joe lowered his head and sighed. You know you don't have to be out here, he asked. Somebody has got to be out here, Joe. If we're not, then who? Joe grinned. With reluctance, he started the engine. Okay, he said. You're the boss, but when we get back, I want hazard pay. Diane smiled and composed in her seat. Joe put the van in gear, and the wheels began to turn. Chapter 11 of The Boy Who Stood on Bricks, written by Kohler. After talking with the sheriff, Mickey trudged back in through the entrance and was greeted, but not all of the hoodlums were happy. Soon the atmosphere changed from admiration to admonishment. What kind of stunt was that? Asked the boy. From what I heard, the sheriff's got plans for us. Jameson, who was idling behind, came forward and handed Mickey a cup of water. Yeah, Mickey, joined another. What was that? He wants to lock every one of us up. Jameson began to tremble. Mickey could see the fear in his eyes and intervened. Shut up, he shouted. The sheriff's not going to do anything. He's got rules. Rules? Scoffed one of the boys. That guy out there hates people like us. We're nothing to him. he had his way, he'd come in here and beat us silly, including Jameson. Mickey frowned. Jameson looked worried. He quickly removed himself from the conversation and returned to his lookout spot. See what you did, said Mickey. You scared Jameson. Now cut this out and stop talking like this. Mickey clenched his fist and formed a menacing stare. But the boys were adamant. Scared Jameson, one continued. He pushed to the forefront of the group. What about us, Mickey? Ken has all them men, and you know they are going to come in after us. They're just waiting for a chance. Yeah, chimed in another. Let's give it while we can. One by one, the boys began to chant, Give it to 'em, give it to 'em, give it to 'em. Mickey turned to Jameson, who was hunkered down into a lookout spot. Their eyes connected, and for the first time since the standoff, Mickey felt unsure. Chapter 12 of The Boy Who Stood on Bricks. Written by Kohler. Outside the shelter, the chanting grew louder. Rex turned to look at the work crew, who were busy talking amongst themselves. He did this knowing full well it would be taken as a cue, and before he had a chance to form an opinion, the lead company man was on him. Why are you waiting, Sheriff? This is stupid. We've been out here all day and you've not done anything. Stupid or not, there are just boys in there. The company man shifted and repositioned himself directly in front of Rex. For his part, the lawman lowered his head and prepared for the brunt of a commanding verbal assault. You don't understand, do you? Asked the company man. You think this is all just fun and games, another day on the job for the old sheriff, where you can walk around with your badge and your big purpose in life to make the world a better place. Well, let me tell you something. You seem to forget that your paycheck depends on this little thing we have going here. If this deal doesn't go through, you'll be lucky to get a job sweeping the streets. Rex raised his head in contempt for the words that entered his precious ears. His eyes were piercing with anger. My duties are protected by an oath, replied Rex. And what is that oath, Sheriff? Are you willing to admit you are not protecting the will of the people to drill for oil? That oath has nothing in it about making your company money. And it has nothing about paid informants and spy drones either, Sheriff, added the company man. It also has nothing in it about keeping an area poor so you can continually and insistently justify this idiotic war on drugs you have been waging. For a few seconds, both men simply studied each other. But Rex broke the spell when he spat and took out his pack of cigarettes. He tapped the pack a few times until one fell gently into his palm. I'm not going to apologize for all the problems with law enforcement, he said, packing the cigarette with his thumb. I know there are problems. There's lots of problems. But if you think I'm going to stand here and listen to you put me down, you're mistaken. Now, I know I'm not the smartest puppy in the litter, I'll admit that, but I've never arrested anyone that didn't deserve it. Some of these boys around here were doing things I'm not even going to go into. And you get this straight, said Rex, leaning in. I'm not going to allow you or anyone to come in here and tell me how to do my job. He finished by placing the cigarette to his lips and palmed a light. Well, that's good, Sheriff, added the company man. That's good to know because, like I said earlier, I have some friends who I can call. Rex thought for a moment and grabbed the man by the shirt. Take your hands off me, Sheriff, or I'll have you arrested for abuse. With that, Rex moved quickly and slapped on the handcuffs. What are you doing? Take these off! Intimidation of a police officer is a criminal act. A what? Questioned the company man. You tried to get me to stand down. Are you out of your mind, Sheriff? With one hand on the man's arm, Rex escorted him to the patrol car. Along the way, one of the members of the work crew rushed over. What are you doing? He's our boss. I'm taking him to jail. What for? Asked the crewman. For attempting to intimidate a police officer. Rex opened the door to the police car and eased the company man into the back seat. I don't think this is good, said the crewman. Well, I don't care what you think, replied Rex. He raised up and stared the man in the face. You know, I could arrest you for interfering with an apprehension. Is this how you get your job done, Sheriff? Asked the company man. Do you bully people into submission? As he was forming a reply, Eston pulled in. Rex grinned. He reached in and pulled the man out by his arm. What are you doing now? Eston, called Rex. Eston approached. "Take this man to the police station." "You're a fool, Sheriff," said the company man. "I've been called worse." "Come on," said Eston, escorting the man away. Rex watched as Eston, with slight hassle, helped the man into the back seat of his patrol car. Then, satisfied, he turned to face the work crew. Each man had the same disdainful gaze. Each man had the same slow-moving lips, muttering words of contempt. The group had collaborated on an opinion, and it was not good. Rex could feel it. Chapter 13 of The Boy Who Stood on Bricks, written by Kohler. From the road, the home appeared to be no more than a shack, something to be feared. The paint was gone, the gray wood was exposed. It sat high in weeds, surrounded by rusting cars and low-hanging tree branches. All that was missing was a sign reading "Condemned." But despite the warnings, Diane and Joe parked the van. "You sure about this, Diane?" asked Joe. Reluctantly, she pushed open the door and started the cautious walk to the front steps. Joe jumped out and followed with the camera. "I don't think anyone's here," Joe said, Diane, approaching the top step. "Go away," shouted a voice. Diane froze. "Joe," she whispered. "I'm right behind you," he replied. "Go away," the voice shouted again. "I don't want you here." Diane was still frozen. "Where is it coming from, Joe?" "The window, to your left." The front door opened quickly. A young woman in her early 20s stepped out. "I'm Marissa. What you want?" "I'm Diane Sims from the 5 o'clock news, and this is my cameraman, Joe. We want to speak with you about the boys in the shelter." "The what?" "The shelter," said Diane. Behind Marissa, an older female stepped out. Her face was pale and wrinkled, her temper stern. "What you want? Why you here?" "I'm Diane Sims. I'm with the news." With the help of a cane, the woman paced herself to a rickety chair where she took a careful seat. "I've lived in these parts all my life," she said. "I've fought off sex-craved men and starving children, but I've never seen anything like this." "Your name, ma'am?" asked Diane. "My name is Zelda Clare," she replied, "and I've got something to say." "But Grandma," said Marissa, "these people are with the news. You told me you hated the news." "I do hate the news, Marissa. They lie all the time. But if they are here, I'm going to speak." "Why do you hate the news, Miss Clare?" asked Diane. "'Cause they lie. Look around you. Do you see where you're at?" Diane crouched down. "Miss Clare," she asked, in a kind, sympathetic way, "do you know anything about the boys in the shelter?" "The what? What's she talking about, Marissa?" "The shelter, Grandma. You know. The one that the retarded boy built. The old silo." "Oh, yes, Jameson," said Zelda. "Who's Jameson?" asked Diane. "Jameson can't speak," said Marissa. "His father beat him so bad, made him stupid." "Oh," said Diane, nodding. "Miss Clare, if I may," she continued, "could I ask you to give me some information on the boys?" "What kind of information do you want?" "Why are they in the shelter? Why does it matter to them so much that they would hold up as they are and defy the oil company?" Zelda chuckled. She looked at Marissa. "Go get that letter they left me." The young woman entered the house and promptly returned with an envelope. "This," said Zelda, taking the envelope into her weathered hands, "is the reason why." Chapter 14 of The Boy Who Stood on Bricks, written by Kohler. Hidden and secured, the hoodlums have formed two groups. One group had the task of removing the explosive powder from a reserve of fireworks. The other group meticulously poured the peppered mixture into flat sheets of paper that were used to form small balloon-like sacks that could be lit and thrown like grenades. Jameson was sitting at his station. As the boys worked on the sacks, he was watching the events unfold outside the shelter. Through the crack, Jameson had watched the company man get arrested. The boys all cheered and clapped at the sight of Eston's patrol car driving away with the company man peering out the back window in disgust. Chapter 15 of The Boy Who Stood on Bricks, written by Kohler. The envelope given to Zelda contained a letter from Rilo's Oil Company, and reading it left Diane trembling with anger. Joe tried to film her, but she pushed him away. She was not concerned with being filmed or how it would look on the news. All she was concerned with was the letter that had somehow made it legal through high channels and backroom deals to remove the residents of the village from their land. The letter read, "Dear Miss Claire, the property on which your home has been built contains a large reserve of oil that Rilo's Oil Company has rights to drill. We at Rilo's Oil Company are requesting that you vacate your premises as soon as possible so the oil extrapolation can begin. We are willing to pay you an amicable amount for your inconvenience. With the support of your community leaders and state legislators, Rilo's Oil Company has reserved the authority to forcibly remove you if you refuse to vacate the property peacefully. Sincerely and respectfully, members of the Rilo's Oil Company Board." "Have you told anyone about this, Miss Claire?" "I called the sheriff," replied Zelda, "but he said there was nothing he could do. He said the company had his hands tied." In disbelief, Diane shook her head. Zelda added, "Nobody cares about this place." "Well, I care," said Diane. "Is there any way we can speak with Jameson?" she asked. "He's deaf," informed Marissa. "Come to think of it," said Zelda, "I guess you could speak with his grandma. Her name is Ruth Benz." Diane recited the name in her head. Zelda stood up. "Well, here's your letter, Miss Claire. Thank you for your time." "You keep it," said Zelda. "Marissa will show you how to get to Ruth's." Chapter 16 of The Boy Who Stood on Bricks, written by Kohler. Eston opened the door to the police station and the company man entered first. The place was empty. "Where is everyone?" asked the man. "You're looking at him," replied Eston. "Are you serious? We're a part-time station. We can't afford it." Eston walked to his desk and sat down in his chair. "I'm not going to lock you up," he said. "The sheriff told me to keep an eye on you, that's all." "Can you remove the handcuffs?" "No." "So this is false imprisonment, I presume," said the company man. "I don't know," replied Eston. "I'm not a lawyer." "No, you're not, deputy. And too bad for you, because when this is over I'm going to sue you." "Now hold on," snapped Eston. "I'm a man of the law. I will not be talked to like that." "Okay," replied the company man. "Then let me rephrase it. At some point, deputy, I will be released from this police station, where I have been taken against my will, detained without being booked, not read my rights, and not allowed to voice my concerns and protests, which I will do as soon as I get to a phone." Eston's eyes grew wide. The company man continued. "Following my announcement to the national press, a call will be made to my lawyer, who will fly in, meet with officials at your fine state capitol, build an argument, make a case, and consequently destroy your future." Eston scratched his head. "See, deputy," continued the company man, "you can walk around here and pretend you're somebody important, but you're not. You're just a small town deputy in a nowhere town. Your job is a sham. Even your good old boy sheriff knows it. If it were not for this endless war on terror and a federal government willing to give tiny departments like yours endless grants, you'd have nothing. Everything you work for is made up. The crime, the statistics, the entire thing is a ruse, designed to make everything from the housewife buying medicine look like a drug addict to the abandoned house appearing to be an opium den. Your job is based on fear. Your job is to fight it. But terror is an idea, deputy. It has no taste, sound, or image. It is an idea, and everything you represent could be ended overnight if these people around here and across this great nation just had a few decent jobs to go to, and that is why I am so passionate about what I do. I want these people to have a better life, a life where they do not have to live in fear of you and your sheriff and their ever-growing government that is more and more dependent on regulation, spies, and war. See, deputy, I am a patriot. I want there to be peace. What better way to ensure peace than to give a man or woman a well-paying job and chance the American dream?" Eston was stumped. What are you getting at? He asked. The big picture, deputy. Only the big picture, and yes, you sound like a hard-working young man, deputy. But if I were to ask around and see what you do at night when nobody is looking, or inquire about your past, what do you think I would learn? You probably hear a lot of things, mostly good, but also some lies. People around here tell them, especially about cops, replied Eston. Really? Asked the company man with a grin. Or do they speak the truth? Eston became uneasy. He stood up and walked to a window where he looked out through a plastic blind. The company man smiled. Eston turned around. This conversation is inappropriate, said Eston. You need to just keep your mouth shut. Would I get a real man then? Asked the company man. Would I get the boy who drank beer before he was 21, drove drunk a time or two, or maybe even smoked a little grass? I was a kid then. Kids do stupid things, exclaimed Eston. That's right, deputy, they do. And don't you think what those boys are doing is a stupid thing? Don't you think they need to be taught a lesson so they can grow up to be good adults? You're asking too many questions, said Eston. Really, asked the company man. They're just questions, deputy. There is no reason to get defensive. There are no devices recording this conversation. At least I think not. The man looked up and around the room. Giving it a careful inspection, Eston did the same, and the man grinned. You don't have surveillance cameras, do you, deputy? No, replied Eston. They were supposed to install them, but they haven't yet. The sheriff's got a box of them in storage. Right, replied the company man with cunning eyes. Then we can talk freely like old friends. We're not friends. You're a prisoner, reminded Eston. No, you're wrong, deputy. I'm a man who is being held against his will. There is a different name for that. Eston walked back to his desk and took his seat. A few moments of silence passed, and then Eston stood up, walked behind the company man, took out his keys, and removed the handcuffs. Thank you, deputy, said the company man in a calm, kind tone as he rubbed his wrist. That is much better. Well, you still can't leave, reminded Eston. I have orders to follow. Eston placed the handcuffs in his pocket, walked to a nearby table with a coffee pot, and began working to brew a few cups. The company man watched the young man prepare the coffee, and as he did, he embraced a roaming thought. Chapter 17 of The Boy Who Stood on Bricks, written by Kohler. Following Marissa was like trying to keep up in a moonshine race. She was pedaled to the floor the entire way to Ruth's house, which was on the road leading back to the shelter housing the boys in the ensuing standoff. Joe did his best to keep up with Marissa's car, but the news van was too heavy. It slid around curves and rocked from side to side. The low profile of Marissa's car made it perfect for high-speed, reckless driving, but the van was cumbersome. Joe had to constantly apply the brakes to keep from losing control and flipping. Slow down, shouted Diane, after one of several violent slams against the passenger door. Don't blame me, said Joe. Blame Leadfoot up here. The door and van tunneled through the woods for several minutes. Finally, Marissa slowed, and both vehicles came to a stop at the entrance to a lane that was visible only to those who were local or lucky. Diane rolled her window down and poked her head out for a better look. Marissa left her car idling in the middle of the road, got out, and ran to Diane's side. This is it, she said. Thank you for showing us, said Diane. Yeah, whatever. Marissa ran back to her car. Joe turned the van into the lane leading to Ruth's house. No more than gravel, it was bumpy, and in places the rain had washed away the gravel and left behind small gullies that made for difficult steering. The closer they came to the home, the worse the drive became. By the time they arrived, the van was making all sorts of creaking sounds from the strain of being bent and twisted by the gullies. The house could have passed for Zelda's, given it had a front porch and weathered surface. Inside the home, the commotion of the van's creaking had caught the attention of Ruth. Before Joe found a place to park, the elderly woman stepped out onto the porch. She had a grimace on her face, and a look as tart as vinegar. Placing her hands on her hips, she picked a spot to stand. This prompted Diane to act. She opened her door and jumped out and fell onto the ground. Well, that's one way to make an entrance, commented Ruth. Diane picked herself up and began brushing off her clothes. A few feet away, Joe finally parked the van. Ruth walked to a rusty folding chair and eased down into it. "I never thought I would see the news van in my driveway," she said. "Sorry to bother you," said Diane, making her way to the porch. "We're doing a story on the boys in the brick building." "If the oil men sent you," snapped Ruth, "I'm not talking to you." Joe emerged from the van with the camera. He walked toward the porch, aiming it off his shoulder. Ruth saw the camera and shouted, "You get that thing out of here!" Joe pulled back from the eyepiece. Ruth stood and began to retreat. Joe looked at Diane and shrugged his shoulders. Diane intervened on his behalf. "Miss Benz, where are you going? We don't mean any harm." "I don't like cameras," Ruth replied. "I'm not talking on camera." Diane turned back to Joe. He was baffled and motioning for Diane to continue. "Miss Benz," said Diane, stepping closer to the home, "I don't understand what is going on. I'm just doing a story on the boys in the brick building. This has nothing to do with oil." Ruth stopped. She eased around. "What do you mean it has nothing to do with oil? Have you any idea what is happening here? This has everything to do with oil." In begging forgiveness, Diane lowered her head, but in disgust, Ruth focused on Joe, who, upon being found out, removed his gaze. "You people," Ruth said, "should be ashamed of yourselves, and I would like to think you are by how you are acting. But if I know people who think they are more important and better than others, like that sheriff of ours and those oil men he hangs with, then you're not. Nope, not you and not them. You act as if the news only happens when you say it does, but I'm here to tell you it doesn't. Sometimes it rains on a sunny day. This place has been going down long before you showed up and long before any environmentalists got involved. So you can do yourself a favor and leave. Nothing to report here." Ruth continued to go inside. But as she was, Diane rushed on to a thought. "Miss Benz," pled Diane, in a nervous tone, "I'm just a reporter, doing a story. I'll admit I have some idea about what is going on out here, but I'm interested in how the boys in the shelter play into this." Ruth stopped. "Miss Benz," asked Diane, pulling out the envelope that Zelda had given her earlier, "did you get one of these?" Ruth stopped and peered at the envelope. "It's a letter from the Conservation Company." Ruth walked inside, and moments later returned with her own envelope. "This was hand-delivered to me by one of them men with the oil company," said Ruth, handing it down. Diane took the envelope, removed the letter, and started reading. It was the same letter that had been given to Zelda, informing residents of the oil under their property. "Does the sheriff know about this?" asked Diane. "The sheriff?" questioned Ruth, breaking into a laugh. "Who do you think is helping them?" The woman leaned back and snorted loudly before regaining a sense of composure. Diane looked perplexed and bit her fingernails. Diane formed a worried look. She stared down at the letter and began reading. "You came out here wanting to know about Jameson, and now look at you." Diane took her eyes off the letter and placed them on the woman's face. "His father was a drunk," said Ruth. "They got him locked up for drugs, and his mother, well, she ran off to wherever." Ruth paused on a thought. "A lot has changed," she continued. "When I was a girl, a man could get a job working for the county with no more than a second-grade education. Now a man can't make a paycheck digging a ditch unless he has a degree." "May I borrow this?" asked Diane, holding up the letter. "You can have it," replied Ruth. "I reckon everyone around here will tell you the same. You know," continued Ruth, "I'm old enough to remember when people helped people, when neighbors wouldn't let what has happened to us happen. Do you know what it was like to have good neighbors?" "I'd like to think I do," replied Diane. Ruth grinned. "Jameson's a good boy," she said, turning to go inside. "He's not slow, he's deaf and mute, but he has more heart and spirit than anyone I know." Chapter 18 of The Boy Who Stood on Bricks, written by Kohler. Eston poured himself a cup of coffee while the company man continued to press him. "Going back to that thing, deputy," the man said with a smirk. "Your life before serving the people." The man had pulled out a chair and was sitting inquisitively. Eston turned and looked at him with contempt. Would I learn, Deputy, that you were sleeping around with girls and getting busted at beer parties? Eston returned to his desk. Like I said, you might hear some things, replied Eston, taking his seat, but they'd be lies. Perhaps, said the company man. Perhaps, questioned Eston. It's the truth. The company man grinned. He looked at Eston in an admiring way. You really believe that, don't you? I do. Laughter took hold of the company man. Do you really think they like you, Deputy? Some do, replied Eston. Some don't. At the end of the day, I really don't care. What if I were to tell you, Deputy, that secretly you are despised? What if I were to tell you that deep down inside nobody likes you, and if they had the chance, they would gun you down like a dog? I don't like where this is heading, he said. And where is that, Deputy? You've been going on about this ever since you've come in here. You brought me, reminded the company man. Well, it doesn't matter how you got here, said Eston. You've said some things that don't sit well. He took a sip and stared. I'm only stating the facts, continued the company man. People don't like authority. Their eyes locked for a few seconds, and then Eston broke free of the spell. Like I said, I don't like where this is heading. The company man shifted his eyes to the telephone on Eston's desk. Let me make a phone call. What for? Asked Eston. I'm a prisoner, Deputy. No. Am I a suspect? No. Then let me make a phone call. It will only take a minute. The man reached for the phone, but Eston stopped him by grabbing his hand. What are you doing, Deputy? I have a right to a phone call. Maybe. Maybe? Questioned the man, pausing on the word for the effect. You can't do this, Deputy. Why not? Asked Eston. Because I'm not under arrest. If anything, I'm being held against my will. I've been kidnapped. Well, I'm not a lawyer, replied Eston. Obviously, added the company man. If you were, you'd know you are in several violations of human rights, which makes me question what it is you really do when you're on the job. Tell me, Deputy, asked the man leaning in. When you're parked on the street, wearing your beetle-eyed sunglasses and making sure the sky is propped up with balsa wood, while the citizens are wearing their helmets, do you ever take a look at something you shouldn't? You should show some respect, said Eston. I grew up here. You don't know what we face. Eston took a sip of his coffee. Then I thank you, said the company man. I thank all of you in the service of your community. Now let me make a phone call, and I'll thank you even more. You might even thank me when it's all said and done. No, replied Eston. And why not? I thought we were having a breakthrough, Deputy. Who are you wanting to call? Asked Eston. I'm going to call a friend, replied the company man. What kind of friend? Asked Eston. A mediator. One who can work all this out with the boys in the shelter and the community. What's this mediator going to do? Nothing, really. Just talk, negotiate, the usual. Yeah, but what's the usual? How do I know you're not going to come in here with killers and wipe all those boys out? Now, what am I supposed to say to that, Deputy? That is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. It's not 1910. I represent a corporation, not a band of mercenaries. My only goal for this community is to see it grow and prosper. I'd like to see that too, said Eston. But I want to know who you are going to call if I give you the phone. And why is it such a big concern of yours anyway, Deputy? Because my name's on the line, exclaimed Eston. If you call in some thugs, I'll be in trouble. Nothing like that is going to happen, Deputy. I'm just going to make a phone call. And soon this entire thing will be worked out. Not to mention, added the company man, I'll be willing to forget all this. He waved his hands around in reference to the reason he was being held. Eston kicked back. So, Deputy, asked the company man, do we have a deal? Eston peered at him with suspicion. He took a long sip of his coffee and begrudgingly handed over the phone. Chapter 19 of The Boy Who Stood on Bricks. Written by Kohler. At the shelter, a small crowd of onlookers had started to form. In the sweltering heat of the day, Rex was pacing around with his hands on his hips, trying to get a handle on what was happening when a whistling bottle rocket came screaming out of the shelter and popped high overhead. The small crowd cheered. You need some help, Rex? Shouted the man. Thanks, he replied, gesturing, but I got it under control. Well, if you need some help, shouted another from the crowd, let us know. Rex nodded in a polite way that helped him get elected. Standing there, thinking, letting thought after thought go through his tired mind, he heard the sound of the news van pulling up. He spun around in time to see the door fly open and Diane jump out. "Sheriff!" she shouted. "Miss Sims," he replied. "You're just in time for the show." "I hope you're joking," said Diane. "Here." She handed him the envelope she had received from her visit with Ruth. Skeptically, Rex accepted. "Rylos has been giving them out to the residents in the village," said Diane. "They claim they have the right to seize the land." Tapping his finger to the edge of the envelope, he looked at Diane and focused his eyes on her with a sinister gaze. "This is good, Miss Sims, real good. You should have been a detective. What else did you learn while you were out and about?" "They say you're on the take." "Who says that?" "Does it matter?" "It does when you're accused of it." Rex's cheeks pulsed with a raging heartbeat, but he was silent, reserved, and fed up. He reached into his pocket for a cigarette and took a few steps away from her so he could light up. "They came to us a little over a year ago," said Rex, "with their paperwork and proposal. A lot of people, more important than me, had signed off on it. We were told we would get money. I don't need to tell you the county's broke." "So you sell out your people to make up the loss." "Is what I'm doing wrong?" he asked. "When people get hurt, it is," replied Diane. "It seems to be the trend these days," said Rex, taking a long drag. "I have a hard time telling the difference. Tell me, Sheriff, how much oil is under this place?" "A lot," he replied. "Enough to give the county better schools, bridges, homes, a future." He paused and took another drag before continuing with, "Make sure to include that in your report, Miss Sims." "Is it worth all this?" asked Diane. "Worth all what?" questioned Rex. He started to approach her. "What are you after, Miss Sims? Is it a story? Are you wanting a promotion? Or are you after something else? Maybe a crusade?" "I'm just doing my job," replied Diane. "Yes, your job." "Well, let me tell you a bit about your job. When I'm not busy soaking my donuts in milk, I turn on the news. You know what I see?" "Enlighten me." "I see things that are bad with the economy. I see that the rich are despised. I hear that people are sick and tired of politicians. But you know what I don't see?" "What?" He stopped. "I don't see anyone asking why they continually vote for it. You want a witch hunt? Start with your audience. Don't blame me, Miss Sims. I'm upholding the law. I'm doing my job." He grinned and took a drag. "What about the people in the village?" asked Diane. "What about them? What are they going to do when this company comes in and takes their land?" He backed away from her. "They'll do what they always do. They'll survive, leave, or go to prison." Mad but confident, Diane started toward the shelter. "Excuse me, Miss Sims," interrupted Rex. "Where are you going?" "I'm getting my story, Sheriff. I already told you earlier you can't go over there." "You need some help, Sheriff?" called out a man from the crowd. Rex waved and took off after Diane, but before he could pull her back, it was too late. She had made it to the entrance of the shelter. Mickey and the boys were waiting to greet her. Jameson squeezed out and got him close, wrapped his arms around the woman, and gave her a kind, gentle embrace. Rex refrained and fell back on his heels. Diane began to go inside the shelter, but not without first looking over her shoulder at Rex, who was showing concern. She entered, and all the boys except for Mickey followed her in. The youth held off to give Rex, the work crew, and the crowd a stern image of defiance. Chapter 20 of The Boy Who Stood on Bricks, written by Kohler. Inside the shelter, all that existed was the smell of sweat, iron, earth, and boy musk. Diane felt a warm chill that made her uneasy. A shadow fell upon them, and she was revived. "You're breaking the law, Miss Sims," said Rex, poking in from the entrance. "You can't be in here." "Then arrest me, Sheriff," replied Diane. "Look, Miss Sims," he begged with a sigh, "I'm only doing what I have to." "Thanks to you, my father's in prison," said one of the boys. "Yeah, me too," added another. "You know what's sad about you, son," commented Rex, It's sad that you've been told them things that just aren't true. My dad told me those things, replied Mickey. He's no liar. Rex lowered his head in disturbing thought. I gotta go, Miss Sims. He eased back from the entrance, taking with him a portion of the growing tension. Diane cleared her throat and began to shake it off. She thought Rex was gone, and she began to speak. But as she was, he returned, catching her off guard and cutting her off. You boys, he said, reminding them in a fatherly way. Listen to me. Don't start out life like this. Bad decisions come back on you sometimes. Diane turned to the boys. Something had changed. Their eyes showed worry. Their fearful dread had set in. It's going to be okay, she said. Intent on keeping vigil, Diane cleared a place at the entrance and sat down. In the floor, the boys removed the explosive powder from the fireworks while others scooped up the grains, placed them on sheets of paper, and carefully molded the grenades. Chapter 21 of The Boy Who Stood on Bricks, written by Kohler. Nighttime settled in on the side of the shelter, and with the darkness the crowd had grown larger and more demanding. The stifling heat of the day had brought about the worst in some of the people. Members of the crowd began to shout profane words, and many of the men had commenced drinking. A group of beer-slamming teenagers had arrived a few hours early in gas-guzzling trucks that were raised high off the ground. They sat, revving their engines and aiming their headlights on the shelter, lighting it up like daytime. Inside the shelter, the bricks rattled from the vibration of the engines, and where once fairly tight seams had existed, shimmering rays of light had broken through the cracks. This caused a great panic amongst the boys, who had found safety by huddling in a clump. On the dirt floor of the shelter they sat, their bodies layered in white light fractures from the shifting bricks. Diane was crouched down with one of the younger boys in her arms. She rocked and stroked the boy's hair. He was nervous and trembling. All the boys were trembling, all the boys except Jameson and Mickey, who had somehow found a way to cover themselves up in a mysterious cloak of courage that neither the roaring engines nor frightening beams could remove. How are you holding up, Miss Sims? Asked Rex, checking in. I hope this isn't too much for you. I'm okay, she replied, but the boys... Rex studied their faces. This crowd is getting large, he said. I'm not sure how much longer this can go on. You think you could talk to them? Who? The crowd or the boys? Rex grinned sarcastically. He eased in. These people want action, Miss Sims, but I want this to end peaceful. Could you help me? Diane turned to look at the boys. Their eyes were bright white, but determined. The only thing I think you can do is the ethical thing, Sheriff, and that is, tell the crowd to stand down. I'm not doing that. Why not? You're the sheriff. There are more of them than me. Then call in someone to help you. Miss Sims, look. 2 whistling bottle rockets shot out of the top of the shelter, interrupting his thought. The crowd went into a frenzy. Men clapped, cheered, and threw out curses. Rex stared at the sky and then stood up. I hold you personally responsible, he said. Chapter 22 of The Boy Who Stood on Bricks, written by Kohler. The sounds of heavy motors and screeching brakes entered the area surrounding the shelter. The boys had spent the night huddled on the floor, but the sound started to wake them. Jameson, being stirred awake by the movements, was the first to rise. He bolted to the entrance and rose up in a manner akin to a prairie dog. He saw the image of a new group of men dressed in blue, militarized suits, forming a defensive line. Each had a plastic shield for protection, and a heavy wood stick for beating. Diane was asleep. The boy hurried to her and shook her shoulder. She opened her eyes, and Jameson pointed. Chapter 23 of The Boy Who Stood on Bricks, written by Kohler. The company man was sound asleep on the visitor's couch when Eston kicked the cushion. Wake up, demanded Eston. Groggy and ill alert, the company man gradually focused. What have you done? Asked Eston. I just got a message from the sheriff. The place is crawling with military. It's not military, corrected the company man. They're a security team. What's your problem? He asked, yawning. Have you made coffee? The problem is you lied to me. You called in your own private army. This is how things are done, deputy. You tricked me, shouted Eston. Tricked you how? You're not the police, reminded Eston. We are. Yes, but private contractors exist for everyone to use. You and your sheriff don't have a monopoly on expertise, deputy. For instance, how do you think I get the information I need to do my work and make the lives of the poor people better? How do you think you get your precious timely information? Do you think every bit of intel that comes across your desk was obtained by using search warrants? Enough of this, exclaimed Eston. No more big talk about this and that. You're crazy. The deputy rushed to his desk and grabbed his phone. I'm not too bright, but I know one thing. This is wrong. You call them off. I will not. You will. Here, continued Eston, holding out the phone to the man. Call them off before this gets bad. Who said it would get bad, deputy? I never said that. Call them off, insisted Eston. No more games. No, replied the company man. He rose to his feet in defiance and began to pace the room. Sit down, ordered Eston. No! I said sit down, and I said no. All right then, affirmed Eston. If you're not going to sit down, I'm going to arrest you for failing to comply with an officer. The man paused and began to chuckle. Seriously, deputy, I don't think that would be a good idea. Then call off your army. No, replied the company man, fading away to his casual self. Why not? Asked Eston. Because they are doing what you and your sheriff refused to do. They are going to get them boys out of there so we can begin drilling. And what exactly are they going to do? Asked Eston, unsure the question even mattered. Nothing. Chapter 24 of The Boy Who Stood on Bricks. Written by Kohler. At the side of the standoff, a camp city was beginning to take shape. Tents were cropping up along the outer edge of the security zone, and the crowd had fashioned together a makeshift community, complete with food, coffee, and water. Diane stood outside the entrance, stretching. Diane, a voice called. Joe walked up. I'm leaving. I want you to come with me. Well, I can't do that. It came down from 5th floor, Diane, said Joe. They say you shouldn't be involved. I'm not going back, she said. I'm staying here. Are you nuts? See those guys? Joe turned in reference to the security force. They're going to tear this place apart. Let them try, shouted Mickey. The youth had been listening from the entrance. He slipped out and walked up to Joe. We're not leaving. Come on, Diane, continued Joe. Let's go before this gets bad. No, she snapped. I'm a reporter, Joe. This is what I'm supposed to do. You're supposed to report the news, Diane, not become part of it. Come on. He reached for her hand, but she moved away. No. Joe paused and looked at her with a loving gaze and warm, friendly smile. You know where this is going, said Joe. Mickey got close to Diane. Jameson emerged from the shelter along with some of the other hooligans. They all circled Diane in a manner that signaled protection. Joe looked at the boys with concern. I'm leaving, he said, returning his focus to her. I really wish you wouldn't. I have to. I got a ball game to record. Rex, who had been paying attention to the conversation, started toward Diane. I heard you're not leaving, Miss Sims, said Rex. Well, at least I know you're not deaf, Sheriff. Tell me, do you always spy? Cut it, Miss Sims. I'm worried. I don't know who these men are or what they plan to do. You didn't call them? No, he replied coldly. The boys heard his words and began to laugh, snicker, and snort. Rex firmed up. He was not amused. Stop that, he ordered. The boys continued to laugh. Stop that, he repeated. The boys broke from their spell. He stared at them with disgust. Their humor subsided. You did not have to raise your voice, Sheriff. I don't want to be here, he replied. I'm going to start raising it. Well, me neither, agreed Diane. Call off these men. I have. It doesn't look like it. They're still here. They won't leave. Won't leave, laughed Diane, raising her voice to a frantic pitch. You're the sheriff. I know, he added in a fed-up way. I've been reminded several times the past few days about what I am and what I should do. Look, he said, those security men have assured me that they are only here for a show. And you don't believe them? Questioned Diane. Leave, Miss Sims. Get out of here. Convince the boys to come out. I'll see what I can do about making sure the company won't press any charges. Nope, will not do. You mean to tell me you're going to put these boys through this thing? He motioned with his hand. This thing that is about to happen? You're out of your mind, Miss Sims. You can't bribe these boys, Sheriff. Admit it. They have you. It's not about who has who at this point. It's about preservation of life and limb. Then do your job. Tell them to stand down. Am I going to have to escort you away? He asked. You try it, fatso, interrupted Mickey, and you'll get it. Rex turned. Mickey was pointing the air rifle at him. Chapter 25 of The Boy Who's Thrown Bricks, written by Kohler. Rex returned to the crowd, hoping to calm down the brooding tempers, but instead he got questions. What are you waiting on, Canton? Do your job and arrest them boys. I am doing my job, replied Rex. It's called a peaceful resolution. You're letting those kids waste taxpayer dollars, said another. He's right, said a third. Will you all just calm down and let me do my job? You've got the whole countryside breathing down my neck. We didn't do that, Sheriff. You did. Now look here, said Rex. No, you look here, said a man, interrupting the argument. You've had your time to think. These boys are held up in a pile of bricks, not a bank. Go in there and get them out. The crowd cheered at the reprimand, and Rex took the words to heart. He focused his attention on the crudely built structure. Jameson had simply stacked the bricks on top of each other. The hooligans had barely made the roof. Strong wind or accidental slip of a brick could cause it to collapse. Either way, Rex would be an easy target for a lawsuit. But what was worse? The negligence to stop harm to a child or potential damage to civil liberties? They were huge questions, deep questions, and one that were bigger than he ever wanted to contemplate. He took this into consideration when he turned to the lead security agent. All right, he said, conceding. You got the green light, but I don't want any of those boys to be harmed. We are professionals, Sheriff. We do a clean job. Rex backed off and watched security agents form a walled line. At the entrance to the shelter, Diane stood up. Rex nodded to her, and this marked the beginning of the end. She dropped back down to the shelter and sighed. I think it's time to give up, she said. Mickey clenched his fist. He slammed it hard against his leg. He rushed out of the shelter entrance, held up the air rifle, and yelled, You just try it! You try, and you'll get this! Mickey! Exclaimed Diane. Turn. Put that away. But he ignored her. Mickey! She shouted again, and still he stood in defiance. A security agent holding a megaphone broke from the line. The agent placed the megaphone to his lips and said, Put the gun down, son. We don't mean you any harm. We just want you to vacate the premise so these men can get to work. No! Shouted Mickey. Son, it is not your decision. I am not going to waste any time. I'm going to count down to 5. At 5, we're rushing. Mickey turned to Diane. She gave him pleading eyes to surrender, but he grinned and tensed up. Don't do this, she said. What do you care? Asked Mickey. I care a lot, she replied. I'm tired of caring, said Mickey. Rex, alarmed by the scene, walked over and yanked the megaphone from the security agent. Miss Sims, he said through the megaphone, you need to get out of there. These men are going to clear that structure. With watery eyes and gathering tears, Diane looked at Mickey. The boy was more determined than ever. You don't have to do this, Mickey, she said. Miss Sims, said Rex. Mickey, please. Miss Sims, listen to reason. Diane looked at Rex. He whispered to the security agent, and the man nodded in agreement. Look, continued Rex, returning to the megaphone. I know what you think you're doing is going to help, but you're only going to make this worse. Rex waited for a response, but when none came, the security agent took the megaphone and placed it to his lips. We've given you all ample time to make a decision, said the agent. This is your final warning. I'm going to start the countdown, and I'm not stopping. Chapter 26 of The Boy Who Stood on Bricks, written by Kohler. Eston sat at his desk, stuck on a thought. The company man was nearby on the couch, contemplating his next move. A red light on Eston's walkie-talkie came on. Rex's voice came through the speaker. Eston, are you there? Eston! The deputy flinched and reached for his handset. Yeah, what is it, Sheriff? Get that company man down here, he said. They're starting. Chapter 27 of The Boy Who Stood on Bricks, written by Kohler. From a distance, Rex lit a cigarette and watched with concern. The security agent held the megaphone to his lips, and with every word there was a slight pause. 1, 2, 3, 4. With the air rifle clenched tightly in his hand, Mickey stepped out from the safety of the shelter. Behind him, a few of the boys took off running. "Where are you going?" asked Mickey. His eyes scanned away from the boys who were fleeing and came to rest on Jameson, who was trembling but remaining. "See that?" shouted Mickey. "Jameson's braver than any of you combined." Mickey walked over and clamped his right hand on the back of Jameson's neck. He squeezed it tightly and growled a warrior's approval. "You're not going to win," said Diane, distracting him. "Who says?" asked Mickey. 5! Mickey spun around in time to see the arm drop and hear the order blast from the megaphone. "Fire!" A fishing line taser cord arrowed out and attached to Mickey's pasty skin. With a violent shake, the boy collapsed to the ground. His teeth began to grind, his hands released the air rifle, and he straightened out stiff until he was lying flat, as though he was aboard. Seeing this awful event, Diane shrieked. She ran to help, but the arm went up again and down hard with the same order. "Fire!" Diane felt the jolt. Her legs buckled. Losing all control of her muscles, she hit the ground, and like Mickey, she began bouncing about in a spastic fit. She gritted her teeth. Her body tightened into a solid plank of flesh. In the background, some of the crowd cheered, some whistled and applauded, but most remained horrified as the security agents slowly marched to the shelter. "Stop this, Canton!" a woman yelled. "Stop it now! You're supporting evil by allowing this to happen." "She's right, Sheriff," added another. "Stop it now! This is sick!" Hearing the words and feeling his spirit soften, Rex hurried to the security agent who was overseeing the operation. "Call it off," he said. "Why?" "Because this isn't right. It's too late, Sheriff. If we stop now, there will be trouble." "Mister, you got trouble no matter what. Now turn this thing off." The arm went up again, but this time, in the drop, turned and aimed directly at Rex. "Fire!" Surprise pinched him. The zapping jolt reached. Paralysis succumbed to gravity. Rex fell hard on the ground, gripping at the earth in the hope of self-control. The violent shakes went on for several time-stopping seconds. Then, as soon as they had begun, the arm went up for a fourth time. The security agent called it off. "Release!" In a style resembling robots, the agents awkwardly turned to face the crowd. The agent raised the megaphone. "If you are still inside," he said through the speaker, "please come out now. If you do not, you will experience the same." He lowered the megaphone and listened. Seconds passed without a sound, and he spoke the words again, but more forcefully than before. "If you do not, and I repeat, do not come out now, you will experience the same." Around the crowd sped Eston's patrol car. He parked, and the company man pushed open his door. He stood and grinned. Eston raised up from behind the wheel. "Is this what you meant when you said no one would get hurt?" asked Eston. "It is hot, deputy," said the company man. "Very hot. And no, this is not what I meant. But as you can see, this is how they had to handle things. I'm not responsible for this." "Eston," a voice whispered, "arrest them." Rex was pointing. Eston focused on the company man. Suddenly, a blood-curdling scream came from the crowd. The agents turned and looked. A woman was pointing toward the shelter. Standing on a pile of bricks was the small figure of Jameson, the deaf-mute boy who always watched and always listened. The company man smiled and moved from the car, pacing his steps towards the shelter. "Come on down, son," he said in a kind, gentle tone. "No one will hurt you. Come down. Come down now." "He can't hear you," groaned Mickey. The man paused and looked down at Mickey, just inches away from his shoe. "Deaf?" he questioned. He angled his eyes in a bewildering gaze upon Jameson. "I bet you get a lot of pity," he said. He continued forward to the shelter. "I bet you get special gifts on holidays and special help in school because you're considered a special little boy." "Eston," called Rex. Shifting, Eston moved. "Try it, deputy," said an agent, "and you'll get what they got." Eston froze. Rex dropped his head in suffering pain. The company man, satisfied, took a few more steps until he was directly before Jameson, who was standing tall on the bricks. Jameson gazed down at the man with calm eyes. The company man grinned and said, "Now, let's see how special you really are." With a fast swipe, the man reached for Jameson's ankle, but when he did, the boy jumped back. Jameson opened his left hand and revealed a cigarette lighter. He opened his right hand and revealed a homemade grenade. Realizing what was coming, the man tried to push away, but it was too late. Jameson leapt off the bricks, and when the two connected, they exploded into a flash. The shockwave hit the crowd with a percussive force. Smoke and cries of agony leached out into the day. The company had got what it wanted. Jameson's silo was no more. The end. Hi, this is Brooks Kohler. I'm the author of The Boy Who Stood on Bricks. I want to thank you for taking the time to listen to the story. And I wanted to talk a little bit about why the story itself was written. I was teaching ethics at a community college in Southern Illinois. I have a master's degree in history, and alongside the history courses that I taught, I also taught philosophy and ethics. And in this ethics course, we looked at authors who had written works that were considered important in the evolution of ethics and also considered important as social commentary. And William Golding, the author of Lord of the Flies, was one author in particular that we focused on. If you're not familiar with Lord of the Flies, it's the story of a group of British school children who get stranded on an island and have to figure out how to get discovered so they can be rescued. And in the process of doing that, they try to delegate duties out to different ones. And what ends up happening is two groups emerge, and one group has its way of doing things, and the other group has its way of doing things. And from there on out, there's this rivalry that exists that finally goes into complete chaos. And that story, when you really break it down, is a metaphor for the way the world seems to work. And at the time that story was written in the 1950s, Golding, like so many others, was concerned about the proliferation of nuclear weapons, something we're still concerned about today. And that story was written to appeal to young children who would read it and find it to be adventure, but also was designed to appeal to adults, perhaps the adults that would sit and read the story to the children. And so it's one of those stories that gets read in high school, it gets read in college, and then gets read later in life. And it really, really speaks to people. It spoke to me, it spoke to my students. It was the one story that they really found to be fascinating when we got into it. That and Kurt Vonnegut. They really liked Kurt Vonnegut. So anyway, that story inspired me to think about writing a story that would take in some of the things I'm seeing in culture now. We're in a time of great activism. We're in a time of exploration when it comes to entrepreneurship. You know, we're at a place in history where nobody has ever been in history when it comes to information sharing. There's always been in history couriers and private messages passed and things like that between individuals, but nothing like what we have now. This is new. And so I wanted to take this small community that was sort of simple and backwoods so I could highlight what happens so many times in our culture. A group that cannot defend themselves ends up getting manipulated by a group that can. And that was the idea behind The Boy Who Stood on Bricks. And the ending, I think some people find disturbing, if not controversial, was created because I wanted to show that these things do have consequences. And if we don't take the time to back away from our own decisions, some of the things that result, there can be no coming back from. And so it was really important for me to put the ending the way I did. I think that it's important people to understand that what we do to others does come back, and it can come back. And so this story was something that came out of me, something that I felt was important to write. Some people will say that you can't bring about any type of change through writing. Writing is one of those things that you can have some time to digest it and think about it. What did the person really have to say? And that's one of the things about this story that I hope people do. I hope they don't just pick it up and read it and say, "Oh, this is worthless trash," or pick it up and say, "Well, it wasn't produced or written very well," or whatever. I wasn't trying to write a Pulitzer Prize winning book or story. I was trying to write something that I thought would quickly convey a message, but also have some deeper meaning to it.